don't let perfect be the enemy of great. And I think that's what I meant to say before. And to just, I think, getting things out there and rather than having it be perfect. I think people who have a bias for action and speed to market, I think these are habits of, at least in my time in finance, working with thousands of founders, I've seen that to be a pattern that denotes success.
Welcome back to Innovate or Evaporate. This is your host, Toph Day, and we are excited today to have Jeanna Q, the CEO of Cowbell Plant Co.
That's right.
On the show with us. Welcome, Gina.
Thank you so much for having me.
So we're going to go all the way from Wall Street to wilted plants.
Let's do it.
And talk about everything in between. When we were having a chat here before the podcast, we're talking a little bit about your background. You did not have hot water in your house.
I didn't. So I was born in Shanghai, and back in the 80s, I'm dating myself here, but nobody had hot water, running hot water in their house. And so at an early age, I really appreciated the scarcity of water and started to, appreciate water. And that translates into, how I invented this product.
So when you were growing up, what did you dream about? What did you think about? Like, how did you envision yourself as an adult?
It's a good question. So my parents actually came to the States before I did. And so they came to the States when I was, 1 or 2. And I grew up with my grandparents. And so I was always dreaming about what my parents were doing out here. And my parents are actually cancer geneticists. And so they were trying
to... fancy.
Yeah. Well, they're trying to cure cancer, right? So talk about trying to live up to people having big dreams and trying to solve big problems. They're retired now. But, when I was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that's what I was thinking about. Like, what are my parents doing? And, what are, they're trying to save the world. And I think that's, yeah.
So you move over to the States,
mm-hmm.
and you went to undergrad at MIT.
I did.
What'd you major in at MIT?
I did econ and math.
Okay.
Yeah. I actually thought I was going to follow in my parents' footsteps and do biology. And then I took organic chemistry, failed out, and was like, this is not my calling. Let's pivot quickly.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So then you made your way to Wall Street, right? You went to UBS and you were at several different firms, but
mm-hmm.
So tell us about that. You're an investment banker.
I was, yeah. So I was primarily in mergers and acquisitions. UBS had a great program where you could just be an M&A banker, but focus on all the sectors. So you were a generalist. A lot of other banks, basically, the minute you step in, you have to focus on a sector, and then you do everything, all the different products within that sector. But because of the way that it was structured, I was exposed to healthcare and metals and mining, industrials, consumer retail, TMT, which is telecom, media and tech, and just real estate, and just got a lay of the land of how everything worked.
So when you first went into banking, what year was that?
That was 2006.
2006. And so I came out of college in 92, and I feel, so the internet, so we were issued emails
right
in college, but nobody used them.
Okay.
We didn't know what we were going to do with these things.
Right.
And there's a story, one of my first jobs out of college, somebody said, hey, I asked you to send me that stuff and you never did. And I said, I emailed it to you.
Yeah.
And the person said, what? You what? You did what?
Yeah.
So, all right. So that was not long after people were trying to figure out that's after the dot bomb. The dot bomb had happened.
Yep.
When you were just entering college, I guess, basically.
Yeah. Just a little bit before that. Yeah.
So then you've seen this whole wave. So as we get in this conversation today, it's going to be exciting because the internet came around in kind of the mid 90s and people started using it, and then all these eyeballs and these massive valuations,
mm-hmm.
right? I know you have some opinions about entrepreneurship and valuations. We're going to talk a little bit about. So you saw that whole ride. So in investment banking, you have exposure cross sector,
yep.
right? How different businesses are valued, how they grow. And you've probably seen some of those result in train wrecks.
Absolutely.
I would presume.
For sure. And then, of course, midway through my banking career, or 2 years in, it was the financial crisis.
That's right.
And
that was 2008. Did it start in 7?
It started around, I would say, February 2008 was kind of when we started having these very serious conversations at work. And then the next day, people next to me were getting their calls from HR, and it was a very scary time.
That's a tough
very
time.
intense time.
Now, were you in New York that whole time? You moved to Miami.
I did. I've since moved to Miami since starting my company, but that was about 3 years ago. And prior to that, I was in New York pretty much the whole time. Had a foothold in New York, but I was in Hong Kong and Beijing and in London and Europe, and so I was doing a lot of cross-border deals. And so for the better half of, I would say, the better part of 2 decades, I was, kind of all around, but primarily, with a foothold in New York. So
you're a highfalutin investment banker, right? You're globetrotting, and you're involved in all these deals where people are raising massive amounts of money, or they're selling, or they're buying a company, et cetera. And then you ultimately end up transitioning. We'll get to here in a little bit. You transition to what I think is the greatest job in the world, becoming an entrepreneur.
I agree.
In fact, I don't think it's a job. It's just like it's a lifestyle. It's
everything.
It's everything. Pretty scary, somewhat manic, right? All those kinds of things. But so you're going through this. So this is no doubt like painting a picture in your mind about if you're going to go be an entrepreneur, how you think about that, and in the proverbial rat race,
right?
When you get on that wheel of venture capital. But it started to paint a picture in your mind of what entrepreneurship is like. Should you raise capital or not?
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So during my finance career, I was helping founders sell their companies and exit or raise significant rounds, right? Whether it was anywhere from A, B, C, D, up through IPO. And so having worked with thousands of founders, I think you develop pattern recognition. You develop a lot of pattern recognition, and every week you're getting 5 pitch books, or you're getting, you're learning about 10 or 15 new companies. And so those things all add up, right? And you start to see what really works, what doesn't work. And the irony of it is that, when you're in finance, especially from an investing perspective, hard tech or consumer tech or hardware, consumer hardware, these are like almost, anathema to investing, right? Like people don't want to touch those sectors because they're incredibly capital intensive at the beginning. And so they're hard to de-risk, especially from an investor perspective. So that was one thing that was going through my head. And then the other thing is just seeing all these founders, start these businesses. The highs are high, the lows are low, but we're usually experiencing the highs with them when they finally, exit their businesses. And I think that inspired me as well to kind of say, at some point, I would like to try that and see what that's like. So that was kind of seed 2. And then the other thing that really, I think, hit me and stuck with me through my finance days, kind of pre-entrepreneur days, was just seeing the things that didn't work, right? When founders would come to me with 2 months of runway, sometimes 10 weeks of runway, and they're like, I have 50 mouths to feed right now. Right. Can you help me raise a Series C right now? And I'm looking at him going, you're out of your mind, right? Like
you spool up sacks
right,
of money.
like capital raising processes from a banker's perspective. I mean, they take at least a month to prep, right? Yeah. Maybe 2. And assuming you have all your ducks in a row, which, founders never do. And now I appreciate why. But, you can't just go to market. I can't just make 20 calls and raise you 120 million, right? So it's thinking a lot. So, that's kind of point 3 that I gathered from that is make sure you have buffer, make sure you have runway, kind of make sure your metrics are all working, and not being so dependent on external capital. What kinds of businesses, can you create that aren't dependent on external capital? And then I would say, the final thing is that it ties into is what kind of businesses just should not be raising capital, period. Right. And that's probably 90 to 99% of companies that should not even be considering venture capital to begin with. And so, again, back in the day, a lot of founders would come to me, they've raised a seed or they've raised a Series A when they probably shouldn't have. And then when, pardon my French, shit hits the fan, right, they come to me and try to raise the next round at it has to be at a better valuation. Otherwise, it's a down round that looks really bad. It's bad for everyone. And it can't be done, right? And when it can't be done, then it's just a slippery slope from there. So
before we came on air here, we were talking a little bit about just the math, right? And so we talk to entrepreneurs a lot about you get silent no's from VCs. If you are raising capital, you get silent no's from VCs because they're looking for very specific things.
Yeah.
And one of those is like a 3x step up.
Yep.
And so if you can't demonstrate that you're going to have a 3x step up or maybe even a 4x step up at the next round, they might just kind of go silent, right? You don't really know why. You were talking about a concept over 10 years that you have to 10x, but that doesn't mean 10x revenue.
Yep.
You have to 100x revenue. So talk a little bit about that. Some of the things that entrepreneurs don't think about from the VC's viewpoint, how they're thinking about a deal and how those two don't meet.
Yeah. Well, I think something that founders often don't realize is that the venture capital model it's a blockbuster model, right? It's a portfolio. So they're hedging across a large number of companies. And so it's, they're not, or, you're not looking at every company individually and saying, okay, this is going to 2x, this is going to 5x. They don't really, at the end of the day, kind of care as much about the individual ones. And you may disagree with me on here. You're like, I love all of our kids equally. But, it's really at the end of the day, the 100xer that's going to hedge out everything else. And that's going to return, 3x the fund. And so I think, from a founder perspective, one, they have to recognize that's the case, right? And then two, the things that math for venture capital is that, they're looking for that 100x, which, are you going to be that company that can do that? And that doesn't mean that you 10x revenue. That doesn't mean, you IPO in 5 years, whatever that is. What it ultimately comes down to is if you discount the cash flows backwards for over a 10-year trajectory, assuming you're raising, let's say, Series A, right? That means you have to essentially double every month over month for 10 years, right? Or at a minimum, double quarter over quarter for 10 years. And maybe you have one bad quarter, that's okay. But that's a hit rate that is incredibly difficult to achieve. And I think most founders who have successfully exited will tell you that that's the reason they have a lot of white hairs.
And I think you hit on a really great point. And I talk with the partners here at Elevate about this a lot. And with this growth fund that we're getting ready to go raise, I think the future of venture capital has already changed forever in the last 6 months or a year. And no more can you rely on that 1 out of 10 to hit big to pay for everything else. That going into it with a mindset of how do we get 8 out of 10 of these to hit at 2 to 5x cash on cash will still put you way into the top quartile. And with all of the proliferation of AI tools and the modernized tools that are out there, of course, it depends what industry you're in, right? If it's a pure play, pure software play or hard tech, that we just can't approach from an investing standpoint. You just can't approach it the way it's always been approached.
Right.
And these multi-billion dollar venture capital funds that are out there, I think it's going to be, it might be a bloody mess on their returns here over the next 3 to 5 years as some of this stuff shakes out. All right. So let's start to move towards Cowbell Plant Co.
Sure.
And how that idea kind of came about in your mind, and what you did as you entered that entrepreneurial journey to start that company. First of all, where'd the idea come from? And because I always love it when it's a personal pain point, right? Yeah. But where that idea came from, and then how you started to actually manifest that into, a first prototype.
Yeah, sure. So, I needed to solve my own problem at the end of the day. I was traveling for weeks at a time, sometimes months at a time for finance. And I loved, growing houseplants, and I would come home and everything would be very sad or dead. And I tried everything on Amazon. And at the time, this was probably 10, 15 years ago, you had kind of watering globes and you had watering, bulbs and some ceramic, terracotta stakes that you stick a upside down, wine bottle in. And there were some kind of siphoning technologies that just, you were essentially, it looked like a meth lab in your house, right? And so these were not things that ultimately worked, right? I tried all of the things. And ultimately I said, okay, can I MacGyver and cobble together some of these ideas and create something that that actually works for the duration that I needed to work for? And I did, right? And so I think it was really during the pandemic when a lot of people started bringing plants into their homes, just realizing the importance of biophilic living because everyone was quarantined at home and couldn't go outside. That the houseplant industry really exploded, and so that was a big trend that started, I think, really at the tail end of 2019, early 2020, and then when the world opened back up again and everyone was traveling again, just realizing, oh wait, there are no solutions now to actually keep these plants thriving and watered when people are back on the road. And so I think that's when really the seed was planted for Cowbell. And I said, well, hey, I actually have the solution. Friends were coming to me, for help. And I said, maybe I need to commercialize this and get it out into the world because clearly I'm not the only person with this problem. And that's, that was the beginning. And
what year was this now?
So 2021 was when I started thinking, okay, I need to commercialize this. And I was still, in finance at the time, but really started to do product development, R&D, and really say, okay, how do we start commercializing it? And so, had to find a team, right? Because with a little bit of engineering background, but, I didn't know CAD or, creating 3D models or any of this. My claim to fame is Excel and PowerPoint. So I had to find people who actually could prototype the idea and the vision and also put the technology to a visual medium. And so it was around, I think, 2022 when we were finally able to create a prototype of the Cowbell. And we went through a lot of iterations, right? And, different form factors and different sizes and trying to figure out what would be aesthetically pleasing, but also really sustainable. I think that was the most top of mind for me is I didn't want another, plastic junk thing that people use and then they just chuck it and, it's damaging for everyone. So I wanted to create something that was beautiful, that was sustainable, and that actually really worked the way that it was supposed to. So our first prototype sort of worked. I'm not going to say it was perfect, and it looks pretty different from how the current iteration is that's out now in the market. But it worked good enough, right? And I think that's a hard pill to swallow and a hard lesson for people who come from this perfectionist background, right? People who feel like whatever you put out in the world has to be perfect. And I certainly am one of those people. I never really subscribed to the 80-20 rule. I was like, it's got to be perfect. And I think that's something that comes from finance. It's very detail oriented. Every comma has to be in place. Otherwise, you have to redo the whole pitch book. This, right, from your background. And so I think the biggest lesson that I ultimately learned, and I'm lucky that I had people surrounding me who drove this into my head, is, don't let great be the enemy of. No, that's not right. We'll cut that. No, I think the saying is, have it exist, then make it good. I think that's the better sentiment. And so that, we have in our warehouse, in a big little placard, is have it manifest in a physical product that you can touch and then make it better and then improve on it and innovate on it. So the first prototype was what it was. It was nice. It worked. And then
that first prototype, what did it actually do?
Yeah, so it self-watered. It self-watered for a period of time, about 2 weeks, right? A week and a half, 2 weeks. And it had a top filling lid, which was very important to me. I wanted it to be able to fill from the top, so you didn't have to remove it from the plant. And it had all of those things, right? It had all of the components. But one of the issues with it was that, as water drained, the pressure in the system would get, you create more and more of a vacuum. So the pressure would get lower and lower, which means that at a certain point, your plant kind of can't use capillary action to suck the water out anymore. And so the next iteration that we created then had to have a pressure release technology that would allow that pressure to regulate itself so that water could always come out as your plant needed it. And so that was another, thing that had to happen. But it couldn't happen until we looked at the first thing and saw what it needed to do and where it was lacking.
So here's what I find so fascinating about this. Number one, I love it because it applies to so many people, right? Across all kinds of demographics.
Yeah.
But how did you find the first people to help you even design this thing? I assume you worked with a third party. Did you hire somebody full time? Or how did you go about finding the group to work with you on that first prototype?
Yeah, it's a great question. It was really just recommendations from friends, right? And this is one of the reasons why, a lot of people say you can do this straight out of college. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's true. I think it takes a certain amount of time to build that network and that ecosystem of people who know the right people who can connect you to the right people. And so I was incredibly fortunate that I, from former clients or other companies I'd worked with who were in hard tech or, knew people who created physical consumer products. And they said, these guys are great. These guys are not so great. These guys are also great. And then just made all the connections. And so I was able to, after speaking to a few different studios and contractors, say, yeah, these guys get me. These guys get the vision. These are the people that I want to bring on board.
And are they in Florida or are they elsewhere?
No, they're actually in New York. So we ended up working with Impel Studio. And I credit them so much with just their patience and their experience and being able to at least bring the initial, vision from vision to prototype. And DFM, which is designed for manufacturing, is a whole other ballgame, right? And we can touch on that in a second. But the initial team that we contracted was Impel Studio, and they were the ones who were at least able to do the first part, right? Yeah. And getting it to prototype. And then the second part is, okay, how do we then manufacture this thing? Because
from a prototype to making 10 or 100.
Exactly. Because and here's again a lesson that I learned the hard way, and these are expensive lessons. So creating anything from zero to prototype is very different from creating something from prototype to even 5,
right?
And then and then from 5 to 1,000, and then 1,000 to 10,000. Right. These are actually completely different processes. And so I thought, well, we have this great prototype. Well, we can scale this to 10,000. Like, why not, right? And then I spoke to factories, and they're just laughing in my face, like, that's cute. Like, that's cute that you think that. And it was very humbling because I had spent 15, 20 years telling everybody else what to do with their businesses.
Well, all you need to do is
and then all of a sudden, just being incredibly humbled, like, ha ha ha, that's cute that you think that can happen. And really the reality was different materials just can't be scaled in, mass produced in different ways. And so that was really a big struggle, in the manufacturing process. Like, we now had this beautiful product, this beautiful prototype, but the materials that we wanted to use that were sustainable and, all of this, we could not produce them at scale because either they morphed or, they were warping or they weren't dishwasher safe or like all of these other things that you have to consider when you're mass producing for consumers.
Are there some things that pop out during that phase of some material types you could share with listeners that like we did A or B or C that didn't work out and so we pivoted to this thing?
Yeah. So we were incredibly fortunate. And I think, I credit my factory who makes the reservoir portion, and they're based in Shenzhen. And so we actually have a 3-continent supply chain. So that component, the raw material of the reservoir comes in from Japan, and they had just invented this product or this material. It's a thick-walled PET about 3 years ago.
PET mean?
It's a plastic,
Okay.
right? But it's different from this plastic, right? That the water bottles are made out of, or these they're kind of squishy. So this thick-walled PET, what it's able to do is it's able to be injection blow molded, kind of like a glass effect, to create a glass effect. But it's also able to hold its shape. Because what's really unique about our reservoir, and it's patented for this reason, is that it is not cylindrical, right? And so a lot of these types of water bottles, they're is completely symmetrical and they're cylindrical, and that's easy. That's how bottles have always been made. So because we had a lot of reasons to not do that, we created our reservoir, which is asymmetrical. And so injection blow molding, as you can imagine, if you think about just how glass is blown, having something that's asymmetrical and wanting to repeat that over 10,000 units was really difficult. And so the reason why traditional PET doesn't work or traditional glass doesn't work is those are not repeatable processes, because they'll start warping and doing all sorts of things. So I credit my factory to finding this new material out of Japan that was able to not warp using the process that we developed for it. And I think that was really the turning point, because up until that point, there was a 90% chance we weren't going to be able to do this the way that we wanted it, and we wanted it to.
How many times do you have to switch design partners or manufacturers? How many are you manufacturing today?
Units?
Yeah, where are you at in your growth curve today?
Yeah, so typically our MOQ now is kind of anywhere between 5,000 to 10,000 units that we manufacture at any given time.
Did you have to go through, as you got to 5 to 10,000 now at any given time, how many suppliers or manufacturers did you have to go through that portion of the journey?
Yeah. So it's a good question. The first year that we did it, we did one run, everything was fine. We have different suppliers who manufacture different components. So the consumer sees 3 components in the box. There's the spike, the reservoir, and the lid. But within all of those, there's actually 8 total components, and they all come from different countries and different factories. And so, we source the technology and the lid from Europe, and the reservoir, as we just chatted about, is from Japan. And then the spike, which has a ceramic core and a bamboo and glass outer protecting spike, that's out of China. And so, not only did we start with a lot of manufacturing partners, but over time, what I learned is that you really need a couple of backup manufacturers, just in case, someone decides they no longer want to be in this business, or they no longer, are able to make their margins work and things like that. So that was really last year was the big, our big aha, where we're like, oh, shoot. It takes about 30 to 40 days to make one of these components. If there are inconsistencies, or, we had one of our ceramic manufacturers not be able to do the ceramic component. And so we were, to be perfectly candid, like, we were out of product. We were out of inventory. We didn't have inventory for 2.5 months.
Wow.
Which is really bad.
And customers wanting product.
Yeah. And so we were really fortunate that our customers our community is just amazing. And so they're willing to stay on the wait list and have it on back order. But as an entrepreneur, I'm thinking to myself, we have one chance to make a first impression for a consumer. This is not a great look, right? But yeah, so, now we have a lot more business continuity, a lot more quality assurance protocols in place, and, backup suppliers and manufacturers who understand the process. And I won't even get into now with tariffs and things like that. what other layers of
complexity
of business continuity or kind of moving things around geographically a lot of other companies have had to do. But so far, we've been pretty fortunate to have all of our supply chain intact.
So as we sit here today, you feel like you perfected, at least for this, we'll call it, I guess it's not even V1, it's probably V 1,825.
I mean, for us internally, it's like V105, but from a consumer perspective, it's, we're in V2.
V2?
Yeah.
So, so this product you have today, and people can go buy it at Cowbell Plant Co. Can they buy it on Amazon?
Yeah, so they can buy it on cowbellplant.com, which we're primarily D2C, and then we're also in retailers, brick and mortar retailers around the country as well.
Which brick and mortar?
Yeah, so we primarily work with small businesses and specialty retailers. Okay. So depending on the state that you're in, we have different nurseries and plant centers and shops that carry. Yeah.
So
and we're not on Amazon.
Not on Amazon. Yeah. Okay. So here's what I love, right? So as a consumer, we often buy these products, right? And it feels or seemingly is so simplistic, right? But you have this, and the simple stuff is the hardest to do, I think, right? So all of this research you've done, all of these processes you've gone through. So to deliver this product today, you've got what folks helping you from 3 continents, you said, right? To the consumer, it looks like 3 components. There's actually 8 things that happen, within those 3 components to have this wonderful experience. And by the way, this is near and dear to my heart. I have about 20 plants. I'm a single guy, and I do travel a little bit, so I have these self-watering plants. I cannot wait to go buy some new plants and try out your technology.
Absolutely can't wait to send you some cowbells.
There's some issues with the self-watering systems that I experience. And I'm not an expert, by the way. But this is near and dear to my heart. That's what I love about your product, is that like you can sell it to anybody globally. Right. So all right, so now you've finally got to from the consumer vantage point, V2.0. But now you've got to sell this thing. So distribution, right, is a big one. And even in like software today, with all the AI tools coming about, there's no technology moat in that software world anymore. It's all about distribution and data is your moat, or your secret sauce on how you attack that. So how did you start to think about distribution then? How am I going to get this thing? Did you try to sell it door to door in your neighborhood initially and get some evangelists? And then, how did you attack the distribution process?
Yeah, absolutely. I think people who have done this before will say that first time consumer product founders focus on product, and second time consumer product founders focus on distribution.
Yep.
And I definitely fell into the former camp, and I said, we have to make this product great, and then, we'll figure out the distribution. And fortunately, I think because of the finance background I had, I knew, let's not focus on scaling anything. Let's just get it into people's hands and get early feedback. It doesn't have to be the perfect product yet, but let's at least figure out if there's demand before we go nuts. And really, our first 1,000 customers was from me doing markets, right? We're talking just setting up a booth at a market and saying, or at events, and saying, some of which are plant focused, obviously, and just setting up shop, right? Hanging up a shingle and saying, hey, this is a new technology we just launched. And, initial demand was really great. And that's how we built our early community, because I think for us, community is so huge, right? We're a very mission-driven company. And so from day one, I knew that had to be part of our distribution, was, find anywhere from finding influencers who were in the plant space, who were going to be kind of these niche influencers, to just getting people who understood the use case and had the pain point. It wasn't, let's day one launch on Amazon, right? Where no one knows who I am, where no one knows what this technology is supposed to do, where all of that. It's just harder to have that one-on-one touch point with consumers. And I knew that because this was a new type of product that people hadn't experienced before, they needed to hear it from a live person to build the trust and to build the brand and to build the community and the story. And so that's how I did it. And I think a lot of people would say that I was nuts because, prior to that, I was traveling all over and working with clients in really fancy conference rooms and things like this. And then all of a sudden I was like dragging my little wagon to shows and markets and setting up tents and being like, here's my little product. And then from there, we started going to bigger and bigger trade shows and started, doing wholesale and retail. And so that's been really great. But I think for us, it really started from Grassroots. It was people who used it and said, hey, this is better than the thousands of dollars I've wasted on the Amazon globes and the spikes and the things and the pots and all the self-watering contraptions. And so I'm going to support your company. And then, they would come back to every show that I was at and buy more. And then they would go online and buy more on our website. And so that's really how we, I think, grew. And it was just early believers and people who, started to evangelize.
How much education is there involved in the other components of having a plant? So, right. So if I have a pot, I put a plant in there, and you've got soil, and like, should there be gravel at the bottom or not? Or with your device, maybe that's not real. How do I know I have to put more water in with your device? Do I look in there and I see that water's gone, and so I rewater?
Exactly. Yeah. So it's a clear reservoir, and you can bury it into a bigger pot if you wanted it, if you didn't want to see it. But we find that most of our customers like to see the water level change. And so
that reservoir is above the soil?
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. And so once it goes all the way down, you just pop the lid open, you refill it, and you're good. You're good to go.
So is there other education with folks that have plants that, so our listeners out there, probably every one of them has a plant, right, or more. If not, they should have a plant, because don't plants they do good things for the home, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I can go on and on about the benefits of having greenery in your home. Not only are they, removing a lot of chemicals and things from the air, and the carbon exchange, but just in general, they promote well-being and wellness. And so there's been a lot of studies done about just the, how plants improve emotional wellness and psychological wellness. And in Japan, for example, there's actually a concept called forest bathing. And this is a thing where people will go into nature and literally bathe in the, bathe in the greenery that surrounds them, not with water or anything like this. But
do they take their clothes off and bathe in the forest?
I'm actually not sure. I'm sure you could. But you don't need to. And you can receive the benefits, in that way. But obviously there's the, the carbon and oxygen.
So somebody told me that plants, and I don't know how anyone would know this, but someone told me once that plants know when you come home.
Yeah.
You think that's true?
I do think that's true. So one thing that we actually do as part of our content creation is we create a lot of time-lapse videos. And so I actually physically will travel for, a couple of weeks, and then I'll set up our camera, our digital, video camera, and have it capture the cowbell working in our plants for, weeks at a time. And you can actually see how the plant reacts, right, throughout those weeks. And close as you actually come home, or as you get closer to returning home, they do act a little bit differently. And if you control for things like weather conditions and things like that, I think there's something there in terms of plants having a connection with their human. And I think the new trend is plants are the new pets, right? And I think that's a lot of people resonate with that and are spending more and more time on their plants and are naming their plants. And
should we talk to our plants? Do we know if there's any research out there if we talk to our plants that there's some kind of a vibration interaction,
Yeah,
interconnectivity.
that's the third grade science project, right? Where you play different music. You play Mozart for this plant, and you play, Taylor Swift for this plant. I don't know if you know it, but I
I need
think
to brush up on my Taylor Swift.
yeah, but it's I think a lot of kids actually do this science experiment, and it does show that when you play music, for example, for your plants, they do grow a little bit better than the ones who listen to no music. I don't know if, for sure if speaking or talking to your plants do the same thing, but at least that they're responding to these kinds of sounds and rhythms and things like that.
Well, we know in forests, right, that trees, like from a root standpoint, that they share water supply.
Right.
Right. If this tree needs more water over here, that this tree will stop.
Right.
Taking that water supply.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, without getting too woo-woo, because I like to be science-backed. We are backed by science always. But there's definitely these concepts of the memory of trees, right? And, a lot more kind of spiritual things around plants and nature as well that I think many people, believe in. And that also fuels the wellness aspect of having plants in your home.
So are there different types of plants that I should have? So all the plants that I personally have right now, they're all like, well, I'm not an expert at plants. I bought like the 18 plant jungle gym version of plants, and so some tall ones and some medium ones and some small ones, but none of them are flowering plants. They're all just green.
Yeah.
Should there be a mixture of different types of plants?
I don't think so. I think it's what makes you feel good. It's similar to buying art, right, for your home. I think some art is great for collecting, and some art is great to live with, and some art is both. And so I think similarly with plants, I mean, you can go to a plant auction and buy plants for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Or you can have plants that you enjoy, right? And that are a little bit lower maintenance. Maybe not the 1,000-year-old bonsai, right? Maybe the nice peace lily that you come home to is perfectly fine. So whatever makes you feel good coming home to. And I think that's the big psychological impact of having plants. We actually get a lot of customers who have recently, maybe divorced, right? And so for the first time in 10 years, we might have a man who is single and living alone again. And the first thing that perhaps he decides to get is a new plant. And maybe not being able to keep that plant alive makes him feel not so great. Right. And so then for the first time,
I have a plant right now I'm struggling with.
Yeah. And it makes you feel
I want this thing to live
not
so
great.
bad.
Right.
It makes you not feel good.
Right. And so, we get a lot of comments that after using our product, they're able to keep this plant alive. And I don't want to say it gives them a new lease on life. I don't know that we can take that much credit, but it does, I think, help people take that step, right? Continue to take these steps of growing their confidence in life. And so I think that's something that I had not anticipated happening, as a byproduct of our product. And I love that. I love getting that sort of feedback.
So on this plant, I'm talking about I put a Facebook post out with a picture of it.
Oh, you did? Okay. What kind of plant is it?
It has these big leaves that look like elephant ears.
Okay.
Okay.
Allocation.
Is it called a fiddle leaf or?
Oh, okay. Then it's a fiddle leaf. It's a tree.
It's just kind of a tree looking thing.
Yeah.
And these big elephant ear looking leaves.
Yeah.
And so I took a picture of it and I put it on Facebook, kind of tongue in cheek, right?
Sure.
Anybody have any suggestions, right, on how to get this thing to live? And the suggestions were absolutely hysterical. All kinds of different suggestions, but one of them said maybe it needs a capital infusion.
Oh, that is so great! I love that. I love that so much. Yeah.
I totally cracked up.
Oh no, that's good. I call them fickle leaf figs because they are really fickle and difficult. Difficult to take care of. I mean, if you look at it wrong, they'll drop a leaf just to spite you.
In full disclosure, last night I talked to that plant.
Okay, great.
And I moved it back to its original spot.
Okay.
I feel like it started to not be happy when I moved it from another spot. Because I thought it was going to be happier in a different spot.
Yeah.
So I moved it back in hopes that it will pull through.
Yeah. Well, you asked a question earlier about if there are things that people should know about, whether there should be gravel or, just some of these tips. I think one thing that a lot of folks may not realize is they're similar to, they're living things. They're kind of like if you bring a new puppy home, right?
Yep.
You kind of want to assimilate it slowly. So a lot of folks get really excited. They're, at Home Depot or IKEA or at, their local plant nursery. They're bringing these plants home and immediately repot it, right? And they immediately start dousing it with all kinds of things just because people get excited.
Interesting.
And that's one thing that will definitely make your plant a little, schizophrenic because they're not used to having all of these things change at the same time.
Right.
Right. And so we always recommend, try not to repot, give it some time, at least 2 weeks to assimilate where it's going to be in your home. And then, if you wanted to repot, at least do it in the spring or summer.
Right.
But you can do that after, 2 weeks. And so I think 75% of plants that die in the first year die really in the first 90 days because of the shock.
Too much change.
Yeah, of being rehomed from their nursery settings, which are almost perfect always, right? And so, that's one thing. But everything else, I would say, think about as if it were a living thing, like a more living thing, like an animal type of living thing, or your child, right? And how you might address some of the concerns.
So where are you right now in your business? What's top of mind? What's keeping you up right now in the growth of your business? And where would you say you are kind of on your journey? If you were to, you're not raising capital and don't plan to raise capital.
Yeah.
But if you were to, like, kind of for our listeners, where are you at in your journey and what's keeping you up at night right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, we're about 2 years, old. We soft launched a little bit over 2 years ago. And I would say if we're talking about kind of seed, Series A, that sort of thing, I would say, we're at Series A.
Yep.
We're at Series A stage. I think a lot of things have been de-risked. We have been bootstrapped from day one, and there's no outside capital and probably won't raise outside capital for a while. That's, never any promises, but that's at least the current plan is we're going to try to continue to be bootstrapped. But the company is growing, we're profitable. And, I think what keeps me up at night is, for the most part, the product is fine. There's nothing, there are no more headaches around, changes with the physical product. And I think now it's really more just, how do we get this into more people's hands?
Right.
And
so full on scale.
Yeah. So we're really now on that full path, because I think there's so many e-commerce companies, especially in brands and consumer retail brands over the last 5 years, who have, either turned into zombie companies, right? These highfalutin brands. I won't name any names, but I think if you did a TechCrunch search, anyone who's raised over north of 50 million for a consumer retail company or a CPG company or an e-com company will know what I'm talking about. They raised huge valuations, right, in ZERP era funding, and now either can't raise additional capital or can't continue to scale or can't get to, IPO times, because the business model was, we're going to keep, taking out ads on Meta. We're going to keep taking out ads on Google. And that was the primary distribution for D2C e-com. And that worked for a time, right? And unfortunately, over time, the economics turn upside down.
Yep.
Because you just don't get to the profitability that you need after 5, 6, 7, 8 years that put you on a real path to IPO. And so, we're trying to scale really mindfully, right? And not just throw stupid money into ads until we know that things are scalable and are going to work. But those are things that I think I'm trying to figure out as well, is what's the new playbook, right? Because the playbook from 5 years ago for D2C e-commerce is not going to fly today. But I think luckily from day one, we've been focused on diversifying distribution, right? Whether it's kind of in-person model or digital or D2C or, retail, wholesale, we expanded into those things very early. And the other thing that I would say that really moved the needle for us is, I think a lot of brands start on TikTok. They're like, we're going to go viral on TikTok, and that's what's going to happen. That's going to drive our brand growth. And I think while TikTok is great, we actually never really invested in TikTok day one. There was a competing platform called Flip, which, we were actually the first home and garden brand on that platform. It's social media shopping platform, and it competes with TikTok, but is much, newer and lesser known. And so at the time, I was thinking, I think it's better to be the only game in town in this category versus competing with every other, eyeball.
Look for high density.
Yeah, out there.
Yeah.
And so what we actually realized over the last year is, a lot of TikTok refugees, right? When there was all the ambiguity around, is this going to be able to exist in the US? All of those folks migrated to the Flip app. And we saw a huge, momentum because, we had invested in that platform early and had really built up our brand presence there. And so that really helped us, continue to scale that platform and get a lot of great feedback and early success stories on there. So to answer your question, that was a long way of answering your question of what keeps me up at night. Just continued distribution and now just fully scaling. Yeah, so, mindfully.
And what's the ultimate vision? Do you is this long term for you? Do you look for a strategic acquire at some point? Do you acquire some other things in and around, right?
Yeah.
Plant watering?
Those are all great questions. So I spent a lot of time at plant trade shows, obviously, and there's a lot of great brands out there, a lot of people who are trying to disrupt the Miracle Grows of the world and the, the Costa Farms of the world and the big, plant world players. And from my finance brain, it's hard not to think about, is there a PE roll-up play here, right? That's very obvious to do. I think about that a lot, but that's, that does require capital. If you're trying to do a PE roll-up play to be the next gen brand, for plant care, that's something that is possible, but would require additional capital. And then in terms of ultimate acquirers, I mean, I think that's always in the back of our minds. And I've spoken, we have relationships obviously with a lot of the big names in town, and Easy Plant, for example, being one of our direct competitors. And I know you know them. And then there are a few others as well out there, like the Grow Oyas and other folks. And I know all of them. And I think what's nice about the plant community is everyone is very collaborative.
Yes.
And everyone is trying to really solve the same problem. So it's not as cutthroat as other sectors that I'm used to back in finance, where there are a lot of these competitive issues. But who ultimately could acquire Cowbell I don't know yet. But I would like to continue to see where it goes. At least for us, I think we're just a sprout right now, and there's time will tell of what happens.
I love that, Gina. Like I've always thought you should become friends, get to know your competitors, because you just never know how those relationships evolve and who might end up acquiring who, or who might need who at a different point in their journey in their life.
Right.
And it just seems like more positive things happen when you still find to compete for market share, but to get to know people, I think is always positive. How'd you name Cowbell?
Yeah, I thought it had a nice ring to it. No,
That's awesome.
So I don't know if you're familiar.
Will Ferrell, right?
I was just gonna say, I don't know
cowbell.
if you're familiar with the SNL skit More Cowbell.
You always use More Cowbell.
Yeah, they just had their 50-year anniversary. But I think people of a certain age who are familiar with the skit, the second you say More Cowbell, right, there's just it brings a smile to their face.
Yep.
And that's really ultimately the goal with Cowbell Plant Co. is I wanted to take the stress out of plant care for people. and take the guesswork out of plant care and just, have it be an enjoyable experience. So
we're almost ready for our rapid fire.
Okay.
Our rapid fire rounds.
All right.
But you just made me think of something else. So watering, but and you mentioned like Miracle-Gro a minute ago. So how about fertilizer? Is there a way for systems with your system, or maybe an extension of your system, how we fertilize?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have been thinking a lot about innovating not just watering, but also the fertilizing world. And we've developed a product right now that I'm very excited about. So everything else, not everything else, many things that are on the market are synthetic and high chemical, and it's, leaching into our waterways and creating all kinds of issues environmentally. But what we set out to do actually a couple of years ago from the beginning was we wanted to create a system that could nourish your plants all in one with watering and fertilization. And so we actually have this product developed, and now it's really a matter of, figuring out the packaging and launching it. So that's the next step. You kind of beat me to the punch on that one, but I'm glad you brought it up because that is in the pipeline.
I think it's brilliant.
Yeah.
So if you think about it for a moment, you think about just pet food and all the different, vegan pet foods or better quality pet food. I've come to discover, and I don't currently have a pet. I've had pets in the past, but
you have plants.
I have plants, right? The new pet
exactly.
Is the plants. And so, but how we feed our, dogs and cats, right? And I won't mention any brand names, but brand names that I thought, well, that must just be a great food for your pet because that's what you see all the time.
Yeah.
Actually, it's not. And so there could be a day where then we see plant food, right, from Cowbell, and maybe instead of using the tap water, we buy the liquid from Cowbell, and that's what we use to water our plants. That is awesome. That sounds like $1 billion idea right there.
So I think, that's really the goal here is to continue to innovate.
And I'm sorry to interrupt, but of course it would be vegan.
Yes.
it would be vegan plant food.
Yes. We're putting that on we're putting that on the packaging for sure. Vegan, gluten-free.
Gluten-free. That's awesome.
Organic, certified. Yeah.
That is awesome. That's amazing. Congratulations. I mean, what a journey.
Thank you.
Right?
I really appreciate that.
To solving like wilted plants. This is amazing.
Thank you so much.
I love it. All right. Well, we're going to enter the rapid fire round.
Okay. All right. Let's do it. I'm ready.
All right. So
I
here
feel
we
like
go.
I'm on hot ones right now.
I love it. We have four questions, and whatever comes to mind. There's no right or wrong answer.
Okay.
Like the right answer is your answer.
Okay.
So what is one thing in your industry that you think people should stop doing?
Okay. I think I'm going to actually go back to the finance industry rather than plant care. And I think it is that people should stop when they're capital raising. First of all, capital raising should not be your plan. If you were starting a company, it should not be the only way this company succeeds is we have to go out and raise capital. I think that's something that we should just get out of our heads to begin with. And then when you do decide to capital raise, or if you decide to go on that journey to stop focusing on vanity metrics and things that will ultimately make your life harder and potentially even kill your business down the line. And when I say vanity metrics, it's anything that TechCrunch finds sexy, right? So it is what your post-money valuation is, or your pre-money valuation is, or how much you've raised. These are things that at the end of the day will move the needle much less than you think, and will make your life much harder. Because I think who you get into bed with is very important, rather than the check that they're able to write. This is your investors or people you're getting into bed with for over a decade.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's brilliant advice. You heard it here first from Gina. This is awesome. I love it. What is one thing or a process or a habit that you think leads to the best ability to disrupt?
The one thing I think is don't let perfect be the enemy of great. And I think that's what I meant to say before. And to just, I think, getting things out there, and rather than having it be perfect. I think people who have a bias for action
Yep.
And in, speed to market. I think these are habits of, at least in my time in finance, working with thousands of founders, have seen that to be, a pattern that denotes success.
I love it. If you could solve one problem in the world with innovation, what would that be?
Yeah, I think it would be the problem I'm trying to solve right now with Cowbell. So, at the end of the day, we're incredibly mission driven, and this is going to be a little controversial. I know this is not at all about AI, but we can't divorce ourselves from AI right now, right? Everyone is talking about it. I think there's a very high probability that AI will launch us into the dark ages. And one thing that we are, I think, at Cowbell trying to do is almost the opposite of that, and giving people perspective into, can we balance out that technological advance, which is great, and we use it every day as well. But growing our own food, figuring out how to live sustainably, biophilic living, getting back into nature, that I think at the end of the day is something that we would love to facilitate, at Cowbell, and also just for humanity, hopefully, as well. I think there's a movement towards that, kind of going back to our roots as humans.
That's what I was hoping you were going to say. We need to get back to our roots.
Yeah. So that's something that I hope we can start to work towards.
Real quick, just a tangent building off of that. Anything coming to mind as you think about AI, right? Because we were talking about a little bit of this before the show.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're right. Like it's who knows what we're in for, and some of it could be a little scary, a little dark. Anything come to mind that you want to share that as you think about what you see going on out there around AI?
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the most exciting advances to come out of modern history. But I think because of that, there's a lot of capital going into that space. And I think a lot about whether the capital is getting allocated correctly, or that it should even really get allocated. And I think a lot about whether AI should be a public good or a walled garden. And I think that's kind of where what we're seeing right now is people who are trying to turn it into walled gardens, right? Similar to, social media, for example, and people who are trying to make it a public good. And I'm not sure which way it's going to go, right? Because I think as humans and as capitalists, there's always going to be that component of control, and who can control this, and who can manipulate it, and who can monetize it, versus is this a thing that should benefit all of humanity? And then of course the actual technology. And I was at the Sphere in Vegas.
That's amazing.
Yeah, last year, and they have a really cool exhibition with these humanoid robots who are, and you're able to interact with them. And the things that they're already able to do, and this was last year, so now it might be even more advanced, but the things that they're already able to, detect and interact and engage with it's a little scary.
How long before you think we all have robots in our homes?
Well, we already have robots in our homes, but I think it's
folding the laundry.
Yeah. I think it'll be in our lifetime for sure. Yeah, it'll be in our lifetimes for sure. And it could be the next 5 years. But I do think, again, also within the next 5 years, we're all going to have avatars. Yep. We're all going to have avatars representing who we are to the public, probably before we all get robot assistants. But I think those are the two things that I for sure see happening in our lifetime. Is we'll for the first time be able to clone ourselves, not in the way that we wanted, but we'll be able to clone ourselves with avatars digitally and have, Zoom representations or whatnot, and then have, clones of ourselves in the form of sidekicks.
It's going to be interesting. It's going to be a heck of a ride, that's for sure. Well, Gina, anything we didn't cover today that you're super passionate about that you want to make sure our listeners hear about?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think we covered pretty much everything. I think you were great. But we're super mission driven, and so I'm eating, sleeping, breathing Cowbell most days, and I think a lot about the impact that we're hoping to make with Cowbell on the environment and just empowering kind of humans in terms of building more sustainable biophilic lives. And that's something that, I think at the end of the day, right, whether we're talking about it from a finance angle or we're talking about it from a product angle or any of this, at the end of the day, it's what we're trying to do is helping people create just a better quality of life. So, so I think that's,
I love it.
That's it.
So for everyone out there, if you do not have a Cowbell today for your plant, go out and buy one at cowbellplant.com. For sure, go buy one today or tell your friends to buy them if you don't have a plant. Or if you don't have a plant, go buy a plant and get a Cowbell for your plant. Your plant will definitely be happier. It'll be more well-nourished and be happier for you when you come home.
Absolutely.
So Jeanna Q, CEO of Cowbell Plant Co., thank you so much for coming on Innovate or Evaporate today. I've learned a ton, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you so much.
All right. Until next time.